and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Australian universities.
Ooh,
Yeah, things are getting kind of
interesting.
interesting. Yeah, a little spicy down there.
Yeah.
Um, there's been some headlines about scandals and inquiries and all sorts of things.
Right.
And we're seeing accusations of wage theft and concerns about lavish spending, and even some people saying that universities are turning a blind eye to some pretty serious issues.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, so we found this article in Times Higher Education, and it really digs into all this stuff, and we thought it would be a perfect topic for a deep dive.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about a few isolated incidents.
Right.
We're seeing a pattern emerge across Australian universities that points to a potentially systemic issue with governance.
Okay, so let's break it down a little bit. The article mentions all these inquiries and accusations. What are we talking about here specifically?
Well, we've got inquiries from bodies like the Education and Employment Committee, the Australian Human Rights Commission,
Wow.
even the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security,
Really?
all looking into different aspects of how these universities operate.
Okay.
And the accusations are pretty serious. We're talking about exploiting casual staff, putting national security at risk,
Oh, wow.
and even ignoring serious issues like sexual abuse and antisemitism on campus.
That's a lot. And now, on top of all that, we've got this new Senate inquiry being proposed.
Right.
What's the story there?
It seems to be a direct response to all these concerns that have been building up.
Okay.
Senator Tony Sheldon is leading this new inquiry,
Mm-hmm.
and he's been pretty vocal,
I bet.
calling the university sector lawless
Lawless. Wow.
and criticizing the exorbitant pay of executives who seem to operate without much accountability.
Yeah, it sounds like he doesn't mince words.
Not really, no.
So what exactly will this inquiry be looking into?
Well, they're going to be covering a wide range of issues, everything from wage theft and compliance with employment laws to the composition and accountability of governing councils and, vice chancellor's pay.
So they're really going to be putting these universities under the microscope.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they uncover.
Definitely. Do you think Senator Sheldon's characterization of the sector as lawless is fair, or is that a bit of an exaggeration?
Well, lawless is a strong word,
Yeah.
but it does reflect a very real concern about a lack of transparency and oversight in how these universities are governed.
Okay.
And we also have to consider the broader context here.
Okay.
Australian universities are facing increasing financial pressure,
Right.
partly due to the government's efforts to control international student numbers.
Okay.
So that raises the question, are these governance issues a symptom of a deeper problem,
Mm-hmm.
or are universities just being unfairly scapegoated?
Right. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. Are the financial pressures leading to bad decisions, or are bad decisions making the financial problems even worse?
Exactly. It's a complicated situation.
Yeah, and then you have these specific incidents that really make you wonder.
Right.
Like, the article mentions this incident at Australian National University
Oh, yeah.
involving alleged Nazi gestures during a student meeting.
Yeah, that was pretty disturbing.
And the university did an investigation and said there was no incident, which really confused the Human Rights Committee chair.
It does make you question how these sorts of things are being handled.
For sure. So what are some of the challenges that universities face when they're trying to address sensitive issues like anti-Semitism on campus?
Well, it's a tough balancing act
Right.
because universities are supposed to be places where ideas can be freely exchanged and debated.
Yeah, academic freedom and all that.
Right. But at the same time, they have a responsibility to ensure a safe and inclusive environment for all their students.
Yeah, so how do you find that balance?
That's the million-dollar question. And this incident at ANU really highlights that tension.
And it sounds like people have different opinions about how to move forward.
Yeah, the article mentions Universities Australia expressing their support for good governance,
Mm-hmm.
but then you've got the National Tertiary Education Union really pushing for this inquiry.
So there's a real divide even within the university community
Absolutely.
about how to approach these issues.
Exactly. Some people think the existing mechanisms are enough, while others are calling for more drastic measures to ensure accountability and transparency.
So we've got this complex web of accusations and inquiries and differing opinions. Where do we go from here?
Well, this proposed Senate inquiry is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's going to be digging into a whole range of issues from wage theft and casualization to executive pay and the handling of these sensitive incidents like we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to force universities to answer some tough questions about how they're being run.
It sounds like this inquiry could have a major impact on the future of Australian universities.
I think it will.
Before we dive into that, though, let's take a closer look at some of the specific concerns that are driving all this scrutiny.
That's good.
So you mentioned casualization as one of the things the inquiry is going to be looking at.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is for folks who aren't, in the academic world?
Sure. Casualization is a big issue in Australian universities,
Okay.
and it really impacts the teaching staff and the students too.
How so?
Well, it refers to this increasing reliance on sessional or casual academic staff
Mm.
instead of offering more, secure ongoing positions.
Right.
So basically, you have a big portion of the teaching staff working on these short-term contracts
Uh-huh.
with very little job security and often lower pay than their full-time colleagues.
So it's like the gig economy, but for professors.
Exactly. And just like the gig economy, it creates a lot of instability and uncertainty.
Right. I can see how that would be a problem.
Yeah, and the inquiry is going to be looking into whether universities are exploiting these casual staff
Mm.
and whether this practice is actually hurting the quality of education and research.
Yeah, that makes sense. The article also mentions concerns about how universities are spending money, especially when it comes to consultants.
Right.
What's going on there?
Well, there's this growing perception that universities are spending way too much on consultants,
Okay.
often for things that could be done by in-house staff.
Yeah.
Critics argue that this is a waste of resources,
Mm.
especially when so many universities are struggling financially.
Right.
And the inquiry is going to look into whether this reliance on consultants is justified
Mm-hmm.
and whether it represents a conflict of interest.
Okay, so potentially some shady dealings going on.
Potentially, especially if these consultants are advising on matters that could benefit them personally.
Right. Lining their own pockets.
Exactly.
It sounds like they're really going to be scrutinizing the financial practices of these universities.
Oh, yeah. They're going to dig it deep.
And of course, we can't talk about university finances without talking about executive pay.
Oh, of course not.
Those vice chancellors' salaries always seem to be making headlines.
Yeah, they do.
So what's the deal with that?
Well, there's this perception that some vice chancellors are getting paid way too much,
Okay.
especially when you consider all the financial challenges the sector is facing.
Right. And the issues with staff wages we were just talking about.
Exactly. The optics aren't great.
Not at all. So the inquiry will be looking into whether these salaries are justified.
Yes, and whether there's enough transparency and accountability around how they're determined.
It's interesting because, universities aren't supposed to be run like corporations.
Right.
Their focus should be on education and research, not profits and bonuses.
Absolutely. That's a really important point.
And it seems like that's at the heart of this whole controversy.
It is. This inquiry is really about figuring out whether Australian universities have stayed true to their mission
Okay.
or whether they've become too focused on the bottom line.
So this isn't just about, pointing fingers or finding someone to blame. It's about making sure that Australian universities are actually serving everyone involved.
Exactly.
The students, the staff, and the wider community.
It's about accountability and making sure that universities are living up to their ideal.
Right, and actually making a positive contribution to society.
And it's important to remember that there are people within the university system who are working towards these goals.
Right, it's not like everyone is ignoring the problem.
Not at all. The article even mentions that Universities Australia, the representative body for universities, supports good governance.
Okay, so there are people pushing for change from within.
Absolutely. There are individuals and organizations who are really committed to making universities more ethical and effective.
So it's a really complex situation with lots of different perspectives, but it sounds like there's a real desire for positive change.
Definitely.
This Senate inquiry is really just the beginning of a much larger conversation
It's going to be a long road,
about the future of Australian universities,
for sure. And it's a conversation that everyone should be paying attention to.
especially if you're thinking about going to university.
Exactly, because the outcome of this inquiry could have a big impact on what your experience as a student is like.
Okay, so we've established that Australian universities are at a crossroads. They're facing some serious challenges, but there's also potential for some major reform.
There is.
But what does all this actually mean for you, the listener?
Right.
Why should you care about what's happening in Australia, even if you're not directly involved with those universities?
Well, for one thing, universities play a huge role in society.
Yeah, they educate the next generation of thinkers and leaders.
Exactly. And they conduct research that leads to all kinds of breakthroughs.
And contribute to the economy and social progress in so many ways.
Right. So what happens in higher education really does affect everyone.
And plus, the issues we're seeing in Australia aren't unique to that country.
No, not at all.
I mean, Concerns about governance funding and accountability are popping up all over the world.
It's a global trend.
So this is something that affects all of us, no matter where we live.
Exactly. And by understanding what's happening in Australia, we can learn about the challenges facing higher education everywhere
Right.
and start thinking about potential solutions.
So it's bigger than just Australian universities.
Much bigger.
It's about the future of higher education itself.
Exactly. And this Senate inquiry could be a really pivotal moment.
Yeah, not just for Australia,
Right.
but for the whole global higher education landscape.
It could spark some real change.
Lead to more transparency and accountability.
And a renewed focus on the core values of education and research.
Or it could make things worse.
Yeah, it could create even more tension and distrust in university.
So it's a really fascinating and important development.
Definitely.
We've given you the key facts and insights, but now it's time for you to dive deeper.
Explore these issues.
Yeah, read different perspectives and form your own conclusions.
What do you think the future holds for Australian universities?
Yeah, well, we see a shift towards more accountability.
And a stronger commitment to students and staff.
Or will the focus on money continue to overshadow everything else?
These are questions worth thinking about.
And we hope this deep dive has given you the tools and the inspiration to keep exploring this topic.
It's a complex one.
But it's also incredibly important. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
From accusations of wage theft and all that lavish spending
Yeah.
to this potential for like a total shakeup in how universities are run.
Right.
It seems like Australian higher education is really at a turning point.
It does. And what's interesting is that these challenges aren't just happening in Australia.
Right.
We're seeing similar things popping up in universities all over the world.
So like questions about funding and accountability.
Yeah, and that balance between academic freedom and, social responsibility.
Right. It's a tricky one.
It is.
It feels like we're seeing a global shift in how people think about the role of universities.
I think so too. And that's what makes this deep dive so important.
Right, even if you're not in Australia or connected to those universities. Exactly.
It's about understanding these bigger forces that are shaping higher education.
Yeah, and how they might affect, your life, whether you're a student or a parent or just someone who cares about the future of, knowledge and all that.
Absolutely.
So let's bring it back to you, the listener. What are some of the key takeaways from all this?
Well, first off, remember that universities are powerful institutions.
Yeah, they have a lot of influence.
They do. They shape society in so many ways.
Yeah, like educating future generations, conducting research, all that stuff.
Right. And they contribute to, cultural and economic development.
But with that power comes responsibility.
Absolutely. They have to operate ethically and transparently.
And in the best interests of, the communities they're supposed to be serving.
Exactly.
And what we're seeing in Australia is this demand for accountability.
Right. People are starting to ask questions.
It's like, have some universities lost sight of their mission?
Yeah. Have they become too focused on money?
And, forgotten about their staff and students and the pursuit of knowledge. And that's where this Senate inquiry comes in.
It's an attempt to address these concerns.
To really shine a light on what's going on.
Look for systemic issues.
And hopefully lead to some real change.
It could be a catalyst for positive change.
Yeah, more transparency, better working conditions.
And a renewed focus on those core values of education and research.
But we also have to remember that there are different perspectives on all this.
Of course.
Not everyone thinks we need a total overhaul.
Some people think the existing mechanisms are enough.
And that universities are already working on solutions.
Yeah, they see it as a process of continuous improvement.
So it's not a simple issue.
Not at all.
There are a lot of different viewpoints and complexities.
And hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of all that.
We've given you the facts, the context.
The different perspectives.
And now it's up to you to decide what you think.
What do you think the future holds for Australian universities?
Yeah. Will this inquiry really change things?
Or will it just fade away?
What about the bigger picture?
Yeah, are we seeing a fundamental shift in how universities operate worldwide?
Or are these just growing pains as they try to adapt to a changing world?
These are important questions to consider.
And we encourage you to keep learning and thinking about them.
Keep researching, talking to people, and forming your own opinions.
Because at the end of the day, the future of higher education is something that affects all of us.
It really does.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.